There is a particular kind of quiet that only exists late at night. Not the peaceful kind, not the soft, comfortable hush that settles over a house when everyone is safely asleep. This is a different kind of quiet. The kind that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. The hum of the refrigerator. The soft creak of a floorboard settling. The distant, barely there rustle of leaves outside your window. And in that quiet, in that particular, charged, watchful stillness, something in you knows, deep in your bones, that you are not entirely alone. Now, most of us have felt it at some point or another. Maybe it was just for a split second, that prickling sensation along the back of your neck, the sudden urge to look over your shoulder without knowing why. Maybe it happened at home, in your own familiar space, surrounded by everything you recognize, and yet something just felt off. Something in the air. Something in the shadows at the corner of the room. You told yourself it was nothing. You told yourself your imagination was simply running a little too freely. And maybe you were right. But maybe, just maybe, you were not. Tonight, we are going to sit together in that space. That uneasy, goosebump-raising, heart-quickening space where the rational world and the inexplicable world press up against each other and blur at the edges. The stories you are about to hear are real. They were shared by real people, ordinary, grounded men and women who had no reason to make any of this up, and every reason to stay quiet about what they witnessed. Some of them waited years before telling anyone. Some of them are still not entirely sure what to make of what happened. But all of them carry these experiences with them, quietly, permanently, the way you carry something that has fundamentally changed how you see the world around you. We are going to hear from a teenager who encountered something in the branches of a tree that looked like a child but moved like something far, far older. We are going to hear from a fire investigator who walked down into darkness and heard a voice that stopped him cold. We are going to hear about a board game piece whose severed hands turned up inside a box that had never been opened. About a 4-year-old boy with a ghost brother who whispered terrible instructions. About a cat that stared into a vent for hours, as if it could see something there that no human eye could perceive. About a woman who sensed spikes in the road before she could possibly have seen them, and saved 2 lives in doing so. These are the kinds of stories that do not go away. The kind you find yourself thinking about in that late-night quiet, when the house has settled and the lights are low and the world outside your window has gone very, very still. So make yourself comfortable. Pull your blanket a little closer. And welcome back, or if this is your first time here, welcome. I am so glad you found your way to us. If you enjoy what you hear tonight, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Our little community of nighttime story listeners grows a little bigger every single week, and every single one of you makes this worthwhile. Now, let us begin. Story 1, The Boy in the Tree. When this storyteller was in the later years of middle school, a game called Manhunt swept through their neighborhood like a mild, wonderful fever. If you grew up playing it, you know exactly the appeal. If you did not, imagine hide and seek, but with a twist. One group hides, one person seeks, and when you get found, you do not sit out. Instead, you join the hunters. You become part of the search party. The group of seekers grows and grows as the night goes on, until only a handful of the most skilled hiders remain, and by that point in the evening, the summer dark had well and truly settled in, which, as anyone who has ever played a game like this as a child will know, is absolutely, completely, without question the best possible time to be playing it. By the end of most nights, there would be around 8 kids still out there, the ones whose parents were either particularly generous about bedtime, or had simply forgotten to call them in. Our storyteller was known among the neighborhood kids as something of a manhunt champion. And they are quick to point out, with some self-aware humor, that this title sounds considerably more alarming out of context than it did at the time. On this particular evening, our storyteller was the seeker. They went out to find their first teammate, and it took longer than usual. The first child they found was a boy, Matthew. They think his name was, a large, broad-shouldered kid, one of those gentle giants you sometimes encounter even among young teenagers. Someone who did not startle easily. someone who took things in stride. Except that on this night, Matthew was not taking things in stride. He was jittery. He was glancing around in a way that made the hair stand up on the back of your neck just watching him. He was, plainly and simply, spooked. And when pressed, Matthew explained why. He had seen a child. A young one, elementary school age, he thought. And this child had been sitting very, very high up in a tree. Extremely high. Far higher than any child of that size and age should comfortably be able to climb, let alone sit calmly. When our storyteller made a small joke about maybe Matthew having spotted a monkey up there, Matthew considered this for a moment and said, with complete seriousness, that yes, that was actually a fairly accurate description of the way the child had been sitting. And there was something else. The kid had spoken. He had said hello in a quiet, small voice. Just, hello. Nothing more. Matthew stayed glued to our storyteller's side after that, which was unusual. Normally, once you found someone in Manhunt, you split up to cover more ground. But Matthew was not splitting up. He was watching the tree branches. He was flinching at shadows. He was asking if every shape in the underbrush was one of the other kids. Eventually, they found 2 more players and Matthew immediately wanted to tell them about the child in the tree. The other 2 kids were naturally skeptical, they assumed it was some kind of trick, some attempt to mess with them. Our storyteller backed up Matthew's account. They had not seen the child themselves, but they believed Matthew had. The 2 newer hunters went off into the woods to look for the remaining hiders, and Matthew stayed right where he was, beside our storyteller, watching the branches above. The question eventually had to be asked. Why had this particular child rattled him so badly? Matthew was the kind of person who took his time answering things, sometimes to the point where you wondered if he was going to respond at all. But in the near darkness, our storyteller could see him working through how to say what he needed to say. He said that something about the child seemed wrong. That he almost looked old. Not old in the way an elderly person looks old. Old in a way that did not make immediate sense. Like he was clearly a young child, elementary age, obviously small and slight, but his eyes looked ancient. Like they had seen things no young child should have seen. Like they carried a weight that did not belong on that young a face. Our storyteller prompted him, like a Victorian child, perhaps. Matthew thought about it and said yes, but beyond that. Like somehow, this young child also looked like an old man. They went back to seeking. And then, without any warning, our storyteller realized that Matthew had stopped walking. They turned around and found him standing perfectly still several feet back, staring upward. Following his gaze, our storyteller looked up into the branches of a nearby tree, very high up, and could just barely make out what might have been a shape. Or a clump of leaves. Or a shadow cast at an odd angle by the moonlight. It was genuinely hard to tell. They said as much to Matthew, that they could not clearly see what he was describing. And they began to walk toward the tree. Maybe it was one of the remaining hiders, after all. Matthew moved silently. Impossibly silently for someone his size. And he caught our storyteller by the shoulder with a grip that meant business, and told them not to go any closer. Now, our storyteller was in something of a delicate position. They could not see what Matthew was seeing. They did not want to call him crazy. They knew certain topics set Matthew off, and they were alone in the woods, and they wanted none of that particular conflict. So instead, they simply pointed up at the vague shadow they could see and asked Matthew, clearly, honestly, could he really, truly see a child up there? An old-looking young child? And Matthew reacted with immediate horror and said no, not that branch. A different one. He pointed to a branch our storyteller had not yet looked at. What happened next made our storyteller stifle a sound and step backward. Because Matthew was right. Sitting on that branch, a full 20 feet off the ground, easy, was a child. Small. Still. And staring directly down at them with eyes that were, without question, wrong. Young face. Ancient eyes. Exactly as described. He appeared to be wearing some kind of old-fashioned nightgown, soft and pale in the dark, and his feet, as far as they could tell, were completely bare. The child said hello. Shyly. And then asked, in a small, tentative voice, if he could play with them. Our storyteller, gathering themselves as best they could, told the child that the game was just about wrapping up for the night, but that they played most evenings, and if he came out and introduced himself on the ground, earlier in the evening, he was more than welcome to join in next time. The child looked at them for a long, still moment. Clearly sad. Then said, very simply, "Oh, okay." And scrambled along the branch, around the trunk of the tree, and out of sight. They never saw him again. But before he disappeared, in that last fraction of a second before the tree trunk swallowed him from view, our storyteller said that the child's face changed. That the sad, lonely expression simply dropped. And what replaced it was a look of such focused, concentrated rage and hatred that it stopped the breath in their chest. They told Matthew they should leave. The other two seekers had found the last remaining hiders by that point, and everyone went home. Nobody brought the boy up again. There were no local legends that matched what they had seen. No missing children. No haunted forest stories. No history of anything that could account for it. Maybe, our storyteller concedes, he really was just a strange, lonely little boy from the neighborhood, looking for some big kids to play with. If that was the case, though, they are left with two questions that they still have no answers for. The first, why did that child frighten big, solid, unshakable Matthew so deeply and so thoroughly? And the second, why, when our storyteller looked at that child sitting on that branch 20 feet above their head, did they feel entirely, quietly certain that they could see the leaves of the forest directly behind him, just slightly, just faintly, as if his body was not entirely, completely solid? Story 2, don't go any further. If you've ever found something here that resonated, a story that gave you a chill you couldn't quite shake, take a second right now and subscribe to the channel. These stories come from real people, and they deserve to be heard. Now, let's continue. Back in 2007, this storyteller was working as a fire investigator for a large, professional fire department. It was the kind of job that required a steady temperament, someone who could walk into a scene after the worst of it had passed and think clearly, methodically, without flinching. This was not a person who scared easily. The fire in question was a 4-alarm blaze at a cluster of 6 large buildings, constructed in the early 1900s, heavy timber and brick, 7 to 9 stories each, and soaked through for years with an oil-based cleaning chemical that had been used on the floors. These buildings were, in the most literal sense, enormous matchsticks waiting to be struck. The fire broke out around 2 in the morning and burned through 3 of the 6 buildings before it was brought under control. Later that afternoon, the investigators were meeting on site when a fire captain pulled them aside. He had been searching the 4th building for any sign of the fire spreading, and while in the area near the basement, he had heard something. Something he described as blood-curdling screams. Coming from below. The water that had been used to fight the blaze had pooled too deeply in the lower levels for a thorough search, and the darkness down there had made a complete sweep impossible. By the following day, the water should have drained out sufficiently. Our storyteller volunteered to go check it out. Just them, by themselves, with a large flashlight. The entry point was at street level, which, in this particular building, meant the 3rd floor. The basement itself was 5 floors below. 5 floors of absolute, total darkness. No ambient light. No exit signs. Nothing. Our storyteller describes it as a blacked-out environment, unable to see their own hand held directly in front of their face. Now, firefighters work in darkness. That is simply part of the job. The pitch black was not what was unsettling our storyteller as they made their way carefully down the old, creaking wooden stairwell. Each step groaned under their weight, and every pop and crack of the aged wood echoed in a way that made it sound less like a building settling and more like something listening. They reached the sub-basement landing. And that is when they heard it. A voice. A male voice. Deep, gruff, matter-of-fact, coming from further down the stairs below them. And the voice said, clearly and simply, "Stop. Don't go any further." Our storyteller froze. They shone their flashlight down toward the next landing, but the floors were roughly 20 feet apart and the darkness was so complete that the beam seemed to simply dissolve before it reached anything solid. They could not see the landing below. They stood there, telling themselves their mind was playing tricks, that the darkness and the silence and the memory of those reported screams were manufacturing sounds that were not there. And then they took 2 more steps down. The voice came again. Louder this time. More forceful. Drawn out. Not a panicked cry, not a plea. Simply a word, spoken with the absolute, unshakable authority of someone who fully expected to be obeyed. "Stop." Our storyteller turned around and started climbing back up. They are not ashamed to say that their body was shaking. Not a little, a full, whole-body tremor that they had to actively manage so their legs would keep carrying them upward. Moving carefully in the dark. Taking each step deliberately, methodically, letting the flashlight illuminate each one before trusting their weight to it. It felt like one of the longest climbs of their life. When they emerged back into the sunshine, they told their chief that the conditions were simply too dark for a proper search. They said nothing about the voice. They knew what the response would be. Later that week, the building was demolished. Once the debris was cleared down to basement level, investigators brought in a cadaver dog to sweep the area. The dog hit on nothing. A forensic team followed up with a thorough examination of the space. They found nothing. No remains. No evidence of anyone having been there. Our storyteller has no explanation for what they heard that day. What they know with absolute certainty, the kind of certainty that does not fade with time and does not yield to rationalization, is that they heard a voice. And that voice, whatever it was and wherever it came from, kept them from going further. Whether it was protecting them from something down there, or something else entirely, they will carry that question for the rest of their life. Story 3, The Diver's Hands. Now, do any of you remember the board game Mousetrap? That wonderfully chaotic, tactile, completely over-engineered contraption of a game that was somehow also supposed to be a board game. The whole point was building this elaborate Rube Goldberg machine, a swinging boot, a rolling ball, a collapsing cage, and if you were playing it in the 80s, you know that the building of the trap was genuinely more fun than actually playing the game itself. One of the key pieces in the machine was a small plastic diver, posed with his hands pressed together above his head as if about to plunge into a pool, who got launched off a little platform and into a bucket. In the older sets, this diver was green. And with his hands pressed together like that, he looked, very distinctly, like he was praying. Our storyteller grew up in a household full of board games and siblings. The 80s, they note, felt like an absolute golden era for young children when it came to games, not just board games, but those wonderful little Tiger LCD handheld devices. They still remember a Top Gun one with particular warmth, even though its sound effects were, by any objective measure, a series of beeps. The imagination, they point out, filled in whatever the hardware could not provide. There were 4 children in the family. Our storyteller was the second eldest. The eldest was their sister Lisa, and it was Lisa who one day came home with a Ouija board, a purchase that the younger siblings were immediately, electrically excited about. The plan was to try it the next time their parents went out for an overnight date, when Lisa was in charge. That would not be for several weeks, though. In the meantime, the Ouija board box went into the family's board game cupboard, right on top of the Mousetrap box. One evening, with the parents out for an hour or so, our storyteller and their younger brother Kevin were upstairs playing Nintendo when they heard a sound coming from downstairs. They could not quite describe it now, except to say that it was strange, unnatural somehow, in a way that both of them understood without having to put words to it. That silent, exchanged look between 2 people who have both just heard exactly the same wrong thing. They went downstairs. Their youngest sibling, Claire, only 6 years old at the time, and significantly younger than the rest of them, was in the kitchen, and her bottom lip was trembling. She told them she had heard a weird scream coming from the living room. In the living room, things appeared mostly normal, except for one thing. The board game cupboard, a cabinet that closed magnetically, with no reason to come open on its own, had one door slightly ajar. Their sister Lisa joined them. She had been listening to her Walkman and had not heard the sound. They opened the cupboard fully. And the mousetrap box was sticking out in a way that seemed almost pointed, deliberate, as if it were calling attention to itself. They got the box out and opened it. At first, nothing seemed obviously wrong. And then Kevin noticed it. The diver's hands had been cut off. Not broken, not snapped at the wrist the way a plastic piece might snap if a child sat on it or dropped it. Cut. Cleanly. Perfectly. With the kind of smooth, precise edge you would get from a scalpel or a very sharp craft blade. The two praying hands were gone, severed so cleanly that it looked professional. Of course, the immediate assumption was that one of the children had done it. Kevin had been with our storyteller. Claire was 6. And the skill required for that cut seemed far beyond her. That left Lisa, who, to this day, swears on everything she holds sacred that she did not do it. Our storyteller made a small, deflective joke, that the diver could not pray for the mice anymore. The family laughed it off, adopted a running joke about it, and more or less moved on. The game went back in the cupboard. And it stayed there, unplayed, for many years. Fast forward a long time. Their parents have both passed away. It falls to our storyteller, Lisa, and Claire to clear out the family home. Kevin is abroad and cannot make the trip. While going through the board game cupboard, one of the sisters mentions the diver incident. They speculate about why they never investigated it properly, whether perhaps they had at some point and simply forgot. All the old games are still there, exactly as they had been left. The mousetrap box had not been touched since that evening. And right beneath it, also untouched, was the Ouija board, the one they had never actually used. Lisa pulls out both boxes. Sure enough, the diver is still missing his hands. Handless. Just as he had been left. Then Lisa opens the Ouija board box. Inside, alongside the board, the planchette, the pencil, and the notepad, is a small piece of green plastic. 2 hands. Cast in the shape of prayer. Unmistakably, the diver's severed hands, sitting inside the Ouija board box as casually as if they had always been there. A box that, as far as anyone could tell, had never been opened. Both Lisa and Claire swear, on everything and everyone they love, that they have no memory of doing this. And our storyteller raises a point that cuts through any easy explanation: if this had been a prank, why had no one tried harder to frighten the others with it? The whole point of a prank like that would be the reveal. And the reveal had never come. It came now, decades later, purely by accident. Their father had passed away most recently, had died on that property. And all 3 siblings agreed, without much debate, that the Ouija board and the mousetrap box would both be disposed of together. Whatever the explanation, prank, coincidence, or something else entirely, they were not interested in taking any chances with their father's spirit or peace. They burned sage through the house afterward. They did not tell Kevin. He was the skeptic of the family, and he would have laughed. There are other reasons, our storyteller says, that they have come to believe in a protective force watching over that family. Personal things. Things that would fill a whole separate account. But their conclusion is this. Something in that house, perhaps something drawn there, perhaps something that had always been there, would have been given a doorway if they had played with that board. And something else, something gentler, something watchful, did what it could to make sure that door was never opened. Cutting off the hands of a praying figure and tucking them away inside the oracle's box. A strange, quiet, impossible warning. The kind that only makes complete sense many years later, when you open a box you had forgotten about and find something waiting there that could not possibly be there. Our storyteller says they are simply grateful. Grateful they never played with the board. And grateful, in whatever way gratitude can be directed toward the unexplained, for whatever was watching over them that day. Story 4, Mommy, My Ghost Brother. If you've had your own experience with something you can't quite explain, something that happened in your own home, your own space, go ahead and share it in the comments. I read every single one of them, and you are never alone in these experiences. Now, let's keep going. This next story comes from a mother. She notes right away that she has never posted anything like this before, which tells you something about how deeply it shook her. Her son is 4 years old. He does not watch violent or disturbing television. His diet of entertainment runs to dinosaur documentaries and, on special occasions with his mother and her fiancé, the Jurassic Park films. He is described as extraordinarily kind. He is the kind of little boy who will refuse to step on a bug because, in his words, what if it has a family and they miss it? He is empathetic. He is gentle. And he is, by any reasonable measure, a wonderfully ordinary little child. They had moved into their newly purchased house about 2 months prior to the events our storyteller describes. She had lived in spaces that felt haunted before and she knew how to coexist with that, more or less. She noticed small things in the new house, little oddities, the kind she was able to shrug off and go about her day. Nothing alarming. Not yet. Then, at around 11:30 one evening, she heard whistling inside the house. Now, she lives in Appalachia. And in Appalachian tradition, whistling inside after dark is not something you do. It invites things in. It sends out a signal that you do not necessarily want answered. So she called out to her fiancé to stop. He walked into the room from elsewhere in the house. He had not been whistling. He went pale. She told herself he was joking. She went to bed. The next morning, he came into the bathroom while she was in the shower and asked her, carefully, whether she had been pranking him the night before. She told him everything she had experienced. He is a lifelong skeptic. He went pale again, said okay, and dropped it. 2 weeks of quiet. Then, 3 nights before she wrote this account, she was on the phone with her cousin when she heard a crash from downstairs, so loud, so sudden, that she immediately shifted into protector mode. Her fiancé was at work. She went downstairs, her cousin still on the phone and witnessing everything in real time. At first, nothing seemed out of place. And then she walked into the kitchen. A large 3-wick candle, the kind of heavy, substantial item that sits solidly and does not topple easily, had been knocked off the entry table and was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, halfway across the room. The painting that sat beside it on the table had been knocked flat. She told herself it was the house settling, that vibrations had somehow sent the candle sliding. Except that her 4-year-old runs through that house constantly, and the vibration of a running child had never once moved that candle. She tested it herself. Ran. Jumped. Hit the table. The candle did not budge. She went to bed. The following night, more banging from downstairs. Alone again with her son. She went down and was immediately struck by a wave of physical sensation, every hair on her body rising, the certainty of being watched. She spoke aloud to whatever was present, telling it clearly that she understood it was there and did not object to its presence, but asking it, firmly and plainly, to stop doing things when she was alone. She walked back upstairs. That feeling, the one that makes you run up the stairs because it feels like something is right behind you, was so strong that she had to stop on the stairs, turn around, and say out loud that she was not afraid. That she would not be frightened in her own home. Her cat, throughout the night, guarded her bedroom door like a small, vigilant sentry. An hour later, at around 1 in the morning, her son woke up and asked for a movie. She turned one on for him in his room and listened as he began murmuring quietly, a one-sided conversation, easy enough to dismiss as the imaginative rambling of a 4-year-old. He talked to himself all the time. He invented whole worlds, whole characters, whole ongoing stories. Except that what he said to her the following morning was not something she could put away in the comfortable box labeled imagination. He sat with her and looked at her with a completely straight, entirely serious face, and told her that his ghost brother had said he needed to kill her. He said it plainly. Without distress. And he was quick to add, before she could speak, that he would never do that, because he loves her too much. She asked him to repeat it. He did. She pressed gently for more information. The ghost brother, her son explained, had also been telling him to break his toys. To hurt animals. To stomp on the flowers he wanted to pick for her. And she wants you to understand something, her son is the child who will not harm a bug. This child is not capable of cruelty, not as a matter of temperament. The very things the ghost brother was asking him to do were things that would genuinely distress her son to carry out. She does not know if this is simply the elaborate fiction of a 4-year-old's imagination, or if it is something she should be deeply afraid of. She comes from a long line of people sensitive to the paranormal, and she recognizes this as something that crosses a threshold she has not crossed before. She is frightened, not for herself, but for her son. For whatever might be speaking to him in the dark. She asks, plainly and from the heart, if anyone has experienced anything like this. And if anyone has any guidance. Story 5, Gizmo and the Vent. This next account comes with a warm caveat, it is equal parts unsettling and deeply touching, and before it ends, we want to make sure you know that the cat in this story lived a long, loved, wonderful life, passed away peacefully at 18 years old, and was by all accounts absolutely the best of cats. His name was Gizmo. He was a black cat, 3 years old when this story begins, and the entire reason his owner spent nearly a year living back in her childhood bedroom after college. Finding a pet-friendly apartment is, as many of you know, a deeply exhausting experience. Finding a good one, in a place she wanted to actually live. With a landlady who not only accepted cats but introduced herself by showing off her 6 personal feline companions, well. That was worth waiting for. She moved in as quickly as humanly possible. She had few belongings, and of everything she owned, she gave the most careful, painstaking attention to the movers handling Gizmo's enormous climbing tree, watching over that particular item with more protectiveness than she gave to her television or sofa combined. Gizmo, she explains with great affection, was thoroughly and completely spoiled. And thoroughly, completely deserving of every bit of it. Now, the apartment was mostly perfect. There was only one slight issue. In her bedroom, mounted low on the wall, was an air vent grate for the building's ventilation system. Affixed to it was a very formal sticker instructing tenants not to cover the vent or block it in any way. Being a careful and responsible tenant with every intention of keeping this apartment, she left the vent uncovered. And Gizmo became utterly, completely, single-mindedly obsessed with it. He would sit in front of that vent for hours. Simply staring. Occasionally a small, soft sound would escape him. Occasionally he would reach out one gentle paw and swipe at the metal grate. But mostly he just sat there and looked, with the focused, ancient attention that cats bring to things that are invisible to everyone else. She reasoned, sensibly enough, that there might be a rodent somewhere in the ventilation system. A smell she could not detect. She contacted the landlady, who took this entirely seriously, as only a fellow cat owner would, and called an exterminator. The exterminator inspected the vents thoroughly and found nothing. Not a trace of rodent activity. He apparently described the ventilation system as the best maintained he had ever encountered. So, nothing. Just a cat staring at a vent. Over time, Gizmo's attention shifted back to his climbing tree and to his owner. Mostly. She would still catch him sitting in front of the vent occasionally, staring. And knowing now that it was not mice, knowing there was no simple, comfortable explanation for his interest, did, she admits, unsettle her more than she let on. But not too badly. Not yet. Then came the night. She woke up in the deep dark of the night to find her bedroom in complete darkness and the sound of voices and music drifting in from the living room next door. The television was on. She had had a glass of wine or two before bed, but she had not been drunk, and she was fairly sure she had turned it off. She got up to go into the other room. And on instinct, the kind of instinct that does not explain itself, she glanced at the vent as she rose. Gizmo was not in front of it. But for one fraction of a second, one brief, undeniable, impossible moment, she saw 2 points of red light inside that vent. Glowing. Rounded. Unmistakably, completely, looking exactly like eyes. She shifted slightly. They were gone. The angle of the light from somewhere, maybe. The LED on a device reflecting off the metal. Probably. Almost certainly. She went into the living room. Gizmo was on the couch, sprawled across the remote control, having achieved the unlikely feat of turning the television on simply by sleeping on it in exactly the right way. She looked at the screen. The IT was playing. The 1990 version. The Tim Curry version. And the scene that was playing at that exact moment, the scene that filled the screen as she stood there in the dark of her apartment, was the one where Pennywise the clown peers up out of the sewer at Georgie. Face in the darkness. At floor level. Eyes catching the light. She turned on every light in the apartment. She changed the channel to Frasier. The next morning, she placed a large storage hamper directly in front of the vent, formal sticker or no formal sticker. It stayed there for the rest of her lease. She did not renew when the time came, and she felt genuinely bad about disappointing the landlady. She moved back to her parents' house. A small retreat, maybe. But she had, by that point, developed a very real fear of darkness that was new to her. And a very particular, very specific, very justified fear of floor-level vents. She notes, with the perspective of years and the deep fondness of a long companionship, that Gizmo knew. He had always known. And she has learned, in the years since, from that experience and others, to trust an animal's instincts absolutely and without question. They are always right. And she still wonders, sometimes, what exactly it was that Gizmo was watching in that vent. And what, in the end, he protected her from. Story 6, The Stag in the Road. This story belongs to someone else's parents, shared secondhand, but no less vivid for that. The storyteller is absolutely clear on one point: their mother is not someone who embellishes. She is practical. Grounded. She does not believe in the paranormal, particularly. And that has not changed even after what happened. When they ask her to explain it, she goes quiet. Their parents were in their early 20s at the time, freshly engaged, driving home late at night from a party. They were out in the countryside, winding forest roads with no lighting and no guardrails, one side dropping away into thick trees and the other rising steeply up a mountainous hillside. Their country drives on the left side of the road, steering wheel on the right, which meant their mother, in the passenger seat, was riding what our storyteller calls blind, pressed up against the mountain side, unable to see the road ahead around the curves. Dad was a car person. He loved driving. He loved speed. He took any quiet, open stretch of road as an invitation, and back then, speed cameras on rural country roads were essentially a fictional concept. He was barreling along, not dangerously, in his mind, taking the long straights quickly and navigating the hairpin bends with the casual confidence of someone who liked pushing a vehicle to find out what it could do. And then their mother spoke. She told him, calmly, but with a firmness that cut straight through, to drop his speed. Not slow down a little. To nearly stop. Something in her voice reached him immediately. Dad, without demanding an explanation, did what she asked. He brought the car down to around 30 miles per hour. Their mother told him there was something in the road. Around the curve ahead. Something blocking the way. Dad pointed out that she could not possibly see around that bend, that she was on the blind side, that the curve blocked everything. She acknowledged this. She told him she had seen it somehow anyway. A vision of something. Spikes in the road. Dad, to his lasting credit, drove the rest of that long curve slowly. When the road opened up ahead of them, they could see clearly. Standing directly in the center of the lane, massive, motionless, regal, was a stag. A full-grown red deer, enormous and absolutely still, staring forward as if it had always been there and always would be. If they had hit that animal at the speed they had been traveling, the impact would almost certainly have killed all three of them. Their mother has never been able to explain the vision she had. She says it has never happened again, but something about the way she says it makes their child suspect that may not be entirely true. Our storyteller, years later, was taken to the exact stretch of road where it happened. They were young when they first heard the story. And at the curve, right around the spot where the stag would have stood, they felt something. A chill that was not about the temperature. A strange, almost personal sensation that they can only describe as the awareness that something important happened here. Something defining. Something that, had it gone differently, would have unraveled the entire thread of the life they were living. This is a story, our storyteller says, that they do not particularly care whether anyone believes. It happened. And it leaves them with a question they find genuinely haunting in the quiet moments: how many times in any given life does a message like that come through? How many times do we slow down, or change course, or choose one road over another, for reasons we cannot fully account for and never examine too closely? And how many of those inexplicable moments are the whole reason we are still here? Story 7, Greta. Sometimes the most unsettling things come quietly, through the people closest to us, in ways we do not recognize for what they are until much later. This storyteller has a younger sister, Shani, who is 7 years younger. When Shani was small, she had imaginary friends, which was, as their mother explained at the time, entirely normal and actually quite common among young children. Their mother had one herself, she revealed, a big cuddly caterpillar called Mr. Tahungry. The storyteller, who had never had an imaginary friend, found the whole concept fascinating in a slightly puzzling way. They remember thinking of imaginary friends not as something the child invented entirely, but as something that was somehow assigned, as if each child was given a companion suited to them specifically. Shani's first imaginary friend was a girl version of Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars, a fluffy, lumbering entity named Wobble Eyes. This was objectively funny, and it became clear early on that Shani had a particular kind of mind, brilliant, spacey, processing the world in her own distinctive way. She talked to her imaginary constructs openly, using them as a sort of sounding board, a way of untangling her thoughts by externalizing them. She did this for longer than most children do, and as she grew, her imaginary companions evolved, becoming less fantastical, more grounded, more like invisible children around her own age. By the time our storyteller was 16, a junior in high school. Shani was 9, they had mostly tuned this out. Random imaginary children were, at that point, simply part of the background of living with Shani. Until the day they overheard something through the shared vent between their adjoining bedrooms that they could not tune out. Shani was asking her imaginary friend how she died. Our storyteller listened. The conversation made it clear, from Shani's side of it at least, that the friend had died in a car accident. And that the accident had disturbed the town. And that it had particularly upset someone Shani called Millie, which was our storyteller's own nickname. A year and a half before this, when our storyteller was a freshman, a girl they knew named Greta had been killed. She was 14 years old. She had snuck out with 2 older boys, seniors, who were drunk when they got in the car. There was a crash. Greta did not survive. And because of who the driver's family was, it created a ripple of drama and outrage that moved through the whole town. Our storyteller had been, quietly and privately, devastated. It made a certain kind of sense, they reasoned, that Shani would have absorbed details about Greta. She had met her once or twice. She had witnessed her older siblings' grief. She was a perceptive child. This was probably Shani processing something she had observed and internalized. But they asked gently. Described what Greta looked like. Asked Shani to ask her imaginary friend certain questions. The answers that came back, through Shani's careful, earnest reporting, were consistent. They were Greta. And then something happened in town that shook things loose in a new direction. The boy who had been dating Greta at the time, one of the passengers in the car, 18 to her 14, made an attempt on his own life. Out of nowhere, as far as anyone knew. He had never faced legal consequences for what had happened. He was not well liked in town because of it. And the timing of his crisis was unsettling in a way our storyteller could not entirely dismiss. They and a few friends tried a handful of seances to contact Greta themselves. Nothing happened. But around that time, our storyteller started noticing a shadow. Not a threatening one, just present. At the edge of their vision. Persistent. And they noticed something else. The shadow only appeared when Shani was not talking to Greta. As soon as Shani was in conversation with her invisible friend, the shadow disappeared. As if the energy was redistributed, occupied elsewhere. One night, getting up for a drink of water, our storyteller stopped in the middle of their room because they were absolutely, unshakably certain that someone was standing directly behind them, hand raised, just about to touch their shoulder. They could not move. They stood there, rigid, for nearly a full minute. And then the sensation simply passed. And they felt safe again. They got back into bed. And they spoke aloud. They said Greta's name. They said they missed her. They said they would never forget her. That they did not judge her for being in that car. And that is the last thing they remember before falling into a deep, sudden sleep. The next morning, Shani knocked on their door. She said, quietly, looking at the floor, that she had been asked to pass along a message. That Greta had gone home. Then she ran outside to play. The shadow did not come back. The sense of being watched did not come back. The feeling of a presence just behind them, gone. Shani, who has grown into one of the most rational people our storyteller knows, insists to this day that this was not a ghost. That there is some other explanation. She believes her sibling may be reconstructing the story in a more supernatural direction than it actually went. But our storyteller knows what they experienced. And they offer one final detail: the boy from the accident, the passenger, the one who made the attempt on his own life, found his faith within a month of Greta going home. Within 30 days, he had turned his entire life around in a way that people who knew him still find almost impossible to fully account for. They leave you to decide what you think it means. Story 8, The House in the Paper. If any of this is bringing up something from your own past, a house, a feeling, a moment you never quite made sense of, drop it in the comments. I would genuinely love to hear it. And if you are watching for the first time, please subscribe. These stories are released every single week and you really do not want to miss what is coming. This one begins at work. Our storyteller, a 30-year-old, is going about their ordinary day when a customer walks in. An elderly woman. She looks at them with recognition and asks if they are, in fact, the person she thinks they are. Our storyteller confirms their identity. The woman, it dawns on them, was their elementary school English teacher. They assume she simply recognized them and wants to catch up. But what the woman wants to know about is the house. Because, as this teacher recalls very clearly, and as our storyteller has entirely, completely forgotten, when they were around 5 years old, their family's house had been featured in the local newspaper. The reason it had been featured in the local newspaper was that it was allegedly haunted. This does not ring any bells for our storyteller at all. The elderly teacher, however, seems to regard this as somewhat alarming, and reaches out to put a hand on our storyteller's arm and tells them, gravely, that they really ought to ask their mother about it, and that they may not be doing enough to protect themselves spiritually. Our storyteller extricates themselves from this conversation as politely as possible and, the next time they see their mother, brings it up. And their mother, a rational, no-nonsense woman under most circumstances, begins to tell them the story. When our storyteller was 5, the family was living in this house, 2 older sisters, 1 younger sister, parents and a stepfather. And things started happening. Pictures were found hung upside down when they came home after being out. A crucifix kept coming off the wall. The youngest sister, who had a well-documented tendency toward dramatic elaboration, claimed to have seen a dark figure crouching on top of her wardrobe, a girl, covered in soot or ash. Their mother, persuaded by a friend, made contact with a local priest who specialized in what might generously be described as spiritual cleansing. He offered a discounted rate in exchange for permission to bring 2 members of the local press. A journalist and a photographer. The arrangement had the distinct flavor, our storyteller notes, of a hustle. The priest, unclear whether he was ordained, arrived with his team, the press, the parents, and the eldest daughter, and together they conducted a séance in the living room, where the dark energy was described as most concentrated. The priest declared the house cleansed. The local paper ran a feel-good story about a successfully exorcised demon, complete with a photograph featuring what the paper enthusiastically described as a ghost orb hovering over the mother's head. Which was almost certainly a smear on the lens. Our storyteller, hearing all this, assumes the story ends there. A credulous family. A slick spiritual entrepreneur. A slow news week at the local paper. But their mother's face goes dark. And she asks if they really do not remember what came after. Because after the séance, after the newspaper article, things got worse. Not mildly worse. Genuinely worse. Pictures not just flipped but found with the glass cracked. Furniture knocked over in empty rooms. The particular damage that sits just below the threshold of proof but above the threshold of coincidence, when you have been watching it accumulate for weeks. And then the nightmares their younger sister began having. And the night their younger sister woke the adults to tell them they should not have let the paperman into the house, that it had made people angry. And the dream their mother had while pregnant with the last child, in which the birth did not go as hoped. They moved out. They did not discuss it again. The stepfather, not the father of the last sibling, and by all accounts not a pleasant man, was long gone by then. Our mother does not regret leaving. Not for a single moment. Our storyteller's older sisters get noticeably upset when our storyteller suggests the whole thing was a scam. They tell them they should take these things more seriously. And our storyteller sits with all of it, not entirely sure what to conclude. Only this, that if haunted houses are real, they are probably not the loud, dramatic, movie-ready kind. They are probably the quiet kind. The patient kind. The kind that waits, and watches, and chooses their moment. The kind that only shows you enough to keep you uncertain, never quite enough to make you certain. The kind that, in the end, you leave without ever fully understanding what you left behind. Story 9, Must Be Satan. Now we step into a piece of music history, or at least into a very personal, very strange footnote at the edge of it. If you know Donovan Phillips Leitch, the Scottish folk artist who emerged in the mid-60s, you know that he occupies a singular and slightly uncategorizable space in the musical landscape of his era. Prolific, eclectic, deeply strange in all the best ways. Most people, even those who do not know his name, know his most famous song. Season of the Witch, from the 1966 album Sunshine Superman. If you have seen a witch, a horror scene, a darkly atmospheric television sequence in the past 50 years, you have almost certainly heard it. That descending guitar line. That hypnotic, circling repetition. The title phrase. Sung over and over, must be the season of the witch. It is a genuinely unsettling piece of music, and our storyteller, who was not born during Donovan's heyday but loves him deeply regardless, wanted you to understand that before getting into what their grandfather experienced. Because it was their grandfather who told this story first, passed it to their father, and from their father to them. And the grandfather is described as a wonderfully calm, upbeat, positive man, a gentle old hippie who tells stories that are generally cheerful and warm. Getting him to tell this one took real effort. It was 1967. Their grandfather had been saving up his paper route tips, the small, patient accumulation of a young person working toward something specific. What he was working toward was a copy of Sunshine Superman. He had heard the singles on the radio, loved them completely, and wanted the full album. He finally had enough, bought it, brought it home, put it on the family's record player. And there was a problem. The record played normally. Everything sounded as expected, right up until Donovan reached the relevant section of Season of the Witch. In the places where Donovan sings must be the Season of the Witch, there was an audible skip, and in that skip, the phrase that emerged was not the Season of the Witch. It was Satan. Must be Satan. Repeated, each time the phrase came around, with that specific substitution. Must be Satan. Their grandfather's parents were understandably unhappy with this. He brought friends over to listen and verify that he was not imagining it. He was not. They heard it too. What made it more confusing, and more unsettling, was that there was no visible scratch on the record. No physical explanation for the skip. He took it to a friend's house and played it there. It sounded perfectly normal. He took it back to the shop where he had bought it. Normal. He invested in a head cleaner and new needles for the family player. Nothing changed. On his home record player, Donovan sang about Satan. He began, eventually, to find himself imagining a figure, a witch, but specifically a dark one, a satanic one, intruding into his thoughts in ways he could not quite control. He stopped being able to listen to the track. When he put the album on, this figure would surface unbidden in his daydreams. In the end, he gave the record to his friend Jimmy for a small fee, and told Jimmy that if it ever started saying it at his house too, he was to melt the thing immediately. At Jimmy's, the record was fine. It always had been fine, everywhere except that one record player. Their grandfather has never listened to Sunshine Superman again. He is an old man now, and the rule holds firm. If Season of the Witch comes on during a film, during a television show, he mutes it or changes the channel. He does not explain this to anyone who does not already know the story. Our storyteller has searched extensively and found nothing else, no other accounts, no obscure forum post, no urban legend, that matches the specific detail of Must Be Satan. They love Donovan. They listen to the album. They have never had that experience themselves. But they think about it every time the song begins. Story 10, Grandpa from Before. And now, one of those stories that carries a quiet punch, the kind that does not reveal its full weight until the very last moment. Our storyteller was a very young child when this happened. Around 5 years old. Their parents were going through a difficult, protracted divorce, though the child knew nothing of the legal details, only that their parents were going through a lot and that both of them still loved them very much. And in practical terms, what this meant for that particular summer was that they got to stay at Nona and Grandpa's house. The house was old and wonderful and slightly eerie in all the ways that old houses can be for a child with a vivid imagination and a taste for the spooky. Grandfather clocks. Portraits of unknown ancestors that our storyteller invented elaborate backstories for. Locked rooms. Rooms they were told not to enter. An attic they were technically allowed into but were far too intimidated to actually visit. A library full of books that seemed to suggest Nona and Grandpa must be immensely learned people. Stuffed birds. A deer's head mounted on the wall. In short, the absolute ideal environment for a child who loved goosebumps and horror toys and anything with a ghostly edge. Their bedroom was on the far side of the house from their grandparents' room. The bathroom was a couple of rooms down. One night they woke needing both water and a bathroom visit simultaneously, the nightmare combination when you are small and the corridor is dark and you very much prefer your warm bed. They went out into the hall. And further down the corridor, in the dark, there was a figure. Now, their grandparents rarely came to this end of the house. And certainly not at 2 in the morning. But assuming it was one of them, our storyteller called out. The figure turned. He was wearing what appeared to be military clothing, the kind of formal, structured uniform you might associate with a soldier. Except that the uniform was entirely white. And the man himself, his face, his hair, was pale. Extremely pale. Our storyteller was 5, and they were not slow. They understood, standing there in the hallway of their grandparents' old house at 2 in the morning, that they were looking at something they did not have a comfortable word for. They decided, with the remarkable pragmatic flexibility of a young child, that they must still be asleep. That this was a dream. And so they engaged with it. They asked the figure who he was. The figure looked at them, late 20s, stern-faced, with an expression that carried no warmth and no patience, and told our storyteller that he was their grandpa from before. And that children should not be wandering around the halls at night. And that they should get back to bed immediately or they would get the belt. Dream logic or not, our storyteller ran. They stood on a chair to use the sink in their room rather than go back into the corridor. They got back into bed and were overtaken by a deep, immediate exhaustion. They told no one. They knew the rules about other people's dreams. It remained folded away in the back of their mind as a vivid but essentially private experience. Years later. Our storyteller is grown. Their father, now an older man, tells them something that he has never mentioned before. That he was not, in fact, the biological child of the grandfather our storyteller knew. None of the 3 siblings were. Their biological father had died when their dad was only a few months old. He had never known the man at all. The grandfather our storyteller called Grandpa was a later figure in their family's life, a kind man who had adopted all 3 children. The biological grandfather, not a kind man, by any account, had served in the military and died during his service. Their father has photos, he says. Photos of his biological father in his military gear. Would our storyteller like to see them? Our storyteller thinks of the figure in the white uniform. The pale face. The pale hair. The voice that said Grandpa from before. They think about what it would mean if the face in those photographs matched the face in the corridor. They tell their father that they would rather not see them. That they prefer to think of the grandfather they knew as the only grandfather they had. That seeing the photos might diminish a memory they treasure. Their father seems relieved. The photos stay in a box. The corridor stays in a memory. And the question, the real one, the one at the center of all of it, remains unanswered. Would you have looked? Or would you, like our storyteller, have chosen the quiet comfort of not knowing for certain? Story 11, The Face in the Window. Some places carry something with them long after the people have gone. This next story comes from a pair of cousins who decided to explore a condemned building before it was finally demolished, and found that the building may not have been as empty as advertised. The building sat at some distance from a mental rehabilitation facility. It was understood to have housed, at one point, the most dangerous patients, and had been sealed up when houses were built in the surrounding area. It had been locked and inaccessible for as long as our storyteller and their cousin Jessica could remember. Post-Victorian architecture, roughly the size of 3 combined houses, 3 floors, boarded windows. When the news came that the building was finally going to be knocked down to make way for construction, the cousins recognized this for what it was, a last chance. They went one afternoon, accompanied by Jessica's 2 dogs, Floss and Billy. Neither dog was large or particularly delicate, and both were described as brave under normal circumstances. They reached the side of the building and discovered something they had never seen before. The padlock on the side door was open. Not broken, simply unlocked, as if someone had passed through and not bothered to secure it behind them. They removed the padlock. They opened the door. Both dogs pulled free of their leashes within seconds and ran home across the field at top speed. They would not come back despite being called. These normally obedient animals simply would not return. The cousins went in anyway. They had not, it must be noted, thought to bring flashlights, which limited their exploration to areas where enough light came through the boards covering the windows. In the side corridor near the entrance, they found a small chalkboard. The writing on it was difficult to read, a combination of poor handwriting and fragmented phrases. Something about mother. Something else that our storyteller no longer recalls specifically. but which seemed to them like the writing of a patient rather than a staff member. Jessica heard something from the far end of the hallway. They looked. Nothing there. They entered a side room. Broken glass on the floor. A mattress in the corner, somehow still there after a decade or more of vacancy. Jessica did not want to linger in the near-total darkness of this room and went back out into the corridor, and immediately called for her cousin to come look. A chair. One of those plain plastic chairs, institutional issue, the kind used in schools and therapy rooms. It was now positioned far down the corridor near the building's foyer area. It had not been there when they went into the side room. Our storyteller would swear to this without hesitation. They both assumed, immediately and optimistically, that the construction workers must have arrived ahead of schedule, even though there was absolutely no evidence of this, no equipment, no vehicles, no people. They ran out through the side door and across the field toward home. And as they ran, both of them glanced back. In a gap in the boards covering one of the upper floor windows, there was a face looking out. A face that could not have belonged to a construction worker. Because the central staircase inside that building had collapsed. There was no accessible route to the second floor. No one should have been able to get up there. And no one, under any circumstances, should have been looking out at them from that gap in those boards. They run that story over occasionally between them, still, when they see each other. A ghost story they can call their own. And our storyteller adds a gentle, quietly beautiful postscript. Jessica's mother passed away some years later, and for a long time, spanning 2 different countries, Jessica kept encountering a blue butterfly. Circling her. Returning to her again and again. Some traditions hold that a recurring blue butterfly is the sign of a soul coming to check on someone they love. Our storyteller does not know what they fully believe. But between the face in the window and the butterfly, they have begun to think that their cousin has a particular kind of attentiveness, or a particular kind of visibility, to whatever it is that persists beyond the places we expect it to end. Story 12, The Tongue on the Tree. A quick note before this next one, if you are enjoying tonight's stories, please take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find their way to this community, and that means more stories shared, more voices heard. Now let us continue. This storyteller is, by their own description, a completely ordinary person. They live in the Pacific Northwest, they have 2 dogs, and in the spring and summer they hike a particular trail they found years ago that runs alongside a river. Their dogs love to swim. The trail is obscure, it takes a bit of effort to find the trailhead, and the path itself is rocky and uneven, and in 6 years of hiking it, our storyteller has never, not once, encountered another person out there. For someone with a reactive dog, this is essentially paradise. One April, they loaded their dogs into the car, drove out, and started down the trail. About 2 miles in, they found something attached to a tree. Someone had used red rope and large nails to fasten what appeared to be cows' tongues, 2 of them, to the trunk. The tongues had been tightly bound with the rope and then nailed to the bark with heavy nails. Beside the tree, in the shallow river water, there were large bones, also apparently from a cow, scattered across the riverbed. The dog's entire demeanor shifted. Both of them became tense and uncertain. Tails tucked. Heads low. They kept stopping and looking around at the surrounding trees, alert in a way that was not their usual alertness, not curious, but worried. Our storyteller looked around for any sign of a camp, any indication of someone having been there recently, a tent, a fire ring, any trash. There was nothing. No sign of anyone. They turned back. Once they were far enough from the tree, the dogs relaxed. For a week, our storyteller could not stop thinking about it. And then they went back. And the tree was gone. Not just the tongues and the bones, the tree itself. The tree that had been notable enough in its appearance, with a distinctive lean, that our storyteller was sure they would recognize it. They searched around the nearby trunks for nail holes. Nothing. No evidence that the tree had ever been there, let alone that something had been nailed to it. When they searched online for any explanation, what came back consistently was witchcraft. Specifically, a kind of binding ritual, a spell intended to silence spirits, or to silence people. To keep mouths shut. To prevent something from being said. They are not sure this fits the circumstances entirely. But they are sure of what they saw. And they are aware, with a kind of quiet ongoing unease, that they are the only person who regularly uses that trail, and that whoever was there, performing whatever they were performing, knew they would not be seen. Or perhaps knew exactly who might see them, and did not mind. Story 13, The Figure in the Yard. Back when our storyteller lived in Nevada, they and their sister had bedrooms directly across the hallway from each other, both with windows facing the backyard. One night, standing at their vanity mirror, which faced the window, they saw something move past outside. Very tall. Extremely thin. A head that was paper white and completely smooth, with no features. Moving quickly. Dressed in black, possibly a suit. Our storyteller caught only a brief glimpse, but it was clear enough. And they were not, initially, terrified. They went to their sister's room and described what they had seen. Their sister reacted with concern but no claims of her own. They went back to their respective rooms. Their sister came to them moments later, wide-eyed and out of breath. She had just seen the same thing from her window. And then, from our storyteller's own window, it passed again. Their father had taught them something from a young age: if all something does is move past and look at you, it is essentially posturing. It wants your fear. Do not give it. Our storyteller tried to hold on to this. And to some extent it worked. The earth kept turning, as they put it, and life went on. But occasionally they would mention it in conversation with friends and discover that this was not their unique experience. Others in the area had seen the same figure. The same height, the same blankness, the same rapid, skipping movement. Our storyteller calls it Slender Man because the description fits, even though they are fairly certain it is not actually the internet-born creature by that name. What it is, they do not know. What they know is that they saw it. Their sister saw it. And apparently, they were not the only ones. Story 14, The Face with No Expression. This one is brief, but it has not faded in 8 years. Our storyteller was young, a child at home, bedroom in a slightly isolated part of the house, with an adjacent laundry room that had no door. The darkness coming from that open doorway was the persistent, specific fear of their childhood. One night, they were watching television, one of those old heavy-set box TVs, watching an episode of Adventure Time. The lemon grab episode, they recall. When the episode ended, they turned off the television and lay down. Within 2 minutes of closing their eyes, a face appeared directly in front of them. Close. Clear. Pale white. Completely expressionless, not threatening, not smiling, simply blank. And surrounding it, absolute darkness. As if the face had simply materialized out of nothing. They snapped their eyes open and were out of bed and down the hallway before they fully registered having moved. They ran into their father and asked to sleep with him. The night passed without incident. They have never experienced anything like it again. But they have not been able to sleep in complete darkness or complete silence since that night. Even now, years later, they set a sleep timer on their television, something playing softly while they drift off. They need the light. They need the sound. They mention, almost in passing, that the original owner's wife had died in the room their father slept in. And that their father reported, around the same period, having felt his bed being moved. They are not saying it is connected. They are simply noting that these things overlapped. That the house had a particular atmosphere during that time. And that one pale, expressionless face glimpsed behind closed eyes in the dark was enough to permanently, quietly reshape the way they sleep. Story 15, Something in the Bar. Short, sharp, and impossible to dismiss. This one comes from a bartender working the late shift at a dive bar in San Francisco's Soma neighborhood. Our storyteller is matter-of-fact and unembellished. They are not the kind of person who reaches for dramatic language. After the bar was closed and everyone else had gone home, they were sitting alone doing their usual end-of-night routine, smoking, catching up on messages, letting the quiet settle. The building was theirs. No one else was inside. They heard glassware rattling in the kitchen. About 30 feet away. Loud enough to be clearly audible. Their immediate thought, a rat, or at worst, someone who had gotten in while they were distracted. They got up and walked toward the kitchen. The instant they stepped into the kitchen doorway, the sound shifted. Now it was coming from the bar behind them, where they had just been sitting. But louder now. Much louder. More aggressive. They reached for the knife they carry, still thinking, still rational, still assuming it was a person. Walked back into the bar area. And then it hit them. A wave of cold. Their skin went up instantly, every hair standing. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. And the feeling, that particular feeling, the one that is not quite fear but is the thing that lives next door to fear, the absolute certainty of being watched. Of not being alone. They checked every inch of the bar. It is a small place. There was nowhere for anyone to hide and they would have known immediately. No one was there. They sat with what had just happened. And then they wrote it down, because they could not think of anything else to do with it. We are not alone out here, they say. As simply and directly as that. Story 16, The Bell Witch. There is one haunting in American history that stands apart from virtually all others, not because of its scale, necessarily, but because of its documentation. Real names. Real dates. Written accounts from people who were actually present. Not a story passed down through generations of retellings, growing stranger with each version, but something with a paper trail. In 1817, the Bell family of Adams, Tennessee began experiencing things in their home that defied any ordinary explanation. Knocking sounds on the walls in the night. Bed covers pulled away while they slept. And a voice, faint at first, growing more distinct and more confident over time, that could recite scripture, sing hymns, and eventually address individual family members by name. It had a particular contempt for John Bell, the father of the family. It stated plainly that it would kill him. The story spread through the surrounding county and eventually reached Nashville. In 1819, General Andrew Jackson, who would later become the 7th President of the United States, traveled to the Bell farm to investigate personally. Multiple accounts from people who were present describe what happened when his wagon approached the property. The vehicle simply stopped on a dry, clear road. His horses could not move it. His men pushed with all their collective strength and the wagon would not budge. Jackson reportedly declared that whatever force was at work, it had to be the witch they had been hearing about. A voice from somewhere nearby confirmed this. It told Jackson to relax, that the wagon could move on now, and that it would see him that evening. After one night at the Bell farm, Jackson's men were shaking. They left the next day. Jackson is quoted as having said that he would rather face the British Army alone than spend another night under that roof. In 1820, John Bell died under circumstances that the family and their contemporaries found deeply strange. A vial of unfamiliar dark liquid was discovered in the house. The family tested it on a cat, which died immediately. The voice, by this time a regular and unwelcome presence in the Bell household, announced that it had poisoned him. Whether you believe all of it, part of it, or none of it, the Bell Witch case remains remarkable for one simple reason: the documentation. In an era when most hauntings exist only as vague, nameless folk stories, this one has specific witnesses, specific dates, and contemporaneous written accounts. The Bell Witch Cave in Adams, Tennessee is on the National Historical Registry and remains open to visitors to this day. Story 17, The Breathing on the Phone. This one is strange in a specifically modern, unsettling way. Our storyteller was sitting at home watching television, a perfectly ordinary evening, when they noticed a sound coming from their phone. They picked it up and listened. What they heard was breathing. Slow, labored breathing. And the sound of footsteps in snow, that particular compressed crunch that is not quite like any other sound in the world. They checked every open application on the device. There was nothing that should be producing sound. They force-closed everything. The sound continued. They adjusted the volume, turned it up, turned it down. The sound did not change. It seemed independent of the phone's own controls. The breathing was uneven, inconsistent, not a loop, not a recording on repeat. It had the quality of something live. They restarted the phone. The sound stopped. 5 minutes later, they became suddenly and violently ill for a brief period, completely without warning, without any apparent cause, and then felt entirely fine again. The kind of nausea that comes from nowhere and leaves just as inexplicably. They note that they almost never get sick like this out of nowhere, and they connected it, intuitively, to whatever had just happened. A few nights after this, walking their dog toward home in the dark, they heard footsteps behind them. They turned. No one was there. The dog turned too, head up, ears forward, alert. Our storyteller is not panicking. They are genuinely uncertain what to make of any of it. They ask, simply and honestly, if anyone can offer an explanation that covers all of these connected moments, the breathing, the footsteps in the snow, the sudden illness, the dark behind them on the street. They cannot find one that satisfies them. And the inability to find it sits with them still. Story 18, The Banging in the Dark. This storyteller moved from Brooklyn to a quiet rural area about 2 hours from the city, alongside the Pennsylvania border, roughly 2 years before writing this account. They live on the edge of the woods. No neighbors on the forest side, just trees stretching away for miles. They are still, they admit, adjusting to rural life after years of city living. In winter, they move their workspace to the living room, near the wood stove, beside a large window that looks out over the terrace and into the trees. They keep the blinds closed to hold the warmth in. 2 nights before they wrote this, they were working, on a horror story, appropriately enough, when they heard a loud bang. Heavy, solid, the kind of sound made by something substantial falling or striking a surface. They thought it might be the basement. They let it go. A little later, it came again. Louder. Closer. And this time they could feel it, vibrations moving through the floors, up through the walls. Whatever was making this sound was right outside, on the terrace or just beneath it, directly beside them. They did not open the blinds. They went to bed. And as they were pulling the covers back, not 60 seconds after settling down, it happened a third time. Same volume. Same proximity. Same wall-rattling solidity. Something was right outside their house. They woke their partner. They checked the terrace together. Nothing. The rest of the night was quiet. The following evening, their partner went outside to bring in firewood. When he came back in, he asked if she had heard anything while he was out. She had not, she had been inside with music on, feeding the animals. He told her that while he was in the backyard, something had produced a sound from within the forest that was unlike anything he could readily identify. Not a tree falling, no crack, no cascade of breaking branches, no rustling. Simply a sudden, massive bang that made the ground shake under his feet. And then silence. They have decided, at least for now, not to investigate. Our storyteller writes in the morning, with daylight coming through the windows and the stove warm behind them, and says honestly that they are a little anxious about whether tonight will bring it again. They ask what you think it might be. And I will say what I think most of us who live near woodland eventually learn, and what the animals know instinctively, that the forest has its own logic. Its own hours. And sometimes, it simply lets you know it is aware of you too. Story 19, Beatrix the Portal Jumper. Our storyteller has 2 cats, but it is Beatrix who concerns us here. She was adopted 5 years before this was written, when she was 4, making her 9 at the time of the account. She has a history of seizures and certain allergies, and had been returned to the shelter 4 times before our storyteller and her family adopted her, each time within a month. They speculate this was likely because of the seizures, which they found manageable and infrequent. Beatrix began exploring the house immediately upon arrival. Our storyteller followed along, watching. The house has 2 floors, a mostly unused basement with the litter boxes and food, and an upstairs with kitchen, dining room, living room, a back porch via sliding glass doors, and a long hallway with several rooms, including a spare room that our storyteller had slept in from birth until they were 10. They moved out of that room after suffering from severe, persistent night terrors. The nightmares stopped immediately upon moving to a different room. Beatrix explored the whole house. She reached the spare room and began hissing continuously, with real intensity, until our storyteller closed the door. She has not set foot in that room in 5 years. The other animals go in and out freely. Beatrix will not cross the threshold. Not once. After about a month, Beatrix established a nightly routine. She would go to the back sliding door and stare out at the yard for approximately an hour. Then she would walk slowly through every room of the house, methodical and thorough, like someone doing a security sweep. Then she would come to our storyteller's room and curl up for the night. They tested whether she might simply want to go outside. Harness trained her. Took her out. She hated it. They gave up on that theory. The strangest thing, though, is what the family calls her portal jumping. It happens consistently, repeatedly, and cannot be explained by any reasonable understanding of where a cat can be at any given moment. Our storyteller will see Beatrix clearly on her cat bed in the living room, turn around and walk down the hall, and find Beatrix already in their bedroom. They will see her in one room, cross to another, and she is there too. This happens not occasionally but regularly, frequently enough that it has become a standing joke in the household, even as it continues to be faintly, persistently strange. On one occasion, Beatrix got outside without anyone seeing how. Our storyteller and their mother have both arrived, independently, at the same conclusion, that Beatrix has some connection to something they cannot see. That she is, in some way that defies easy categorization, a sentinel. A guardian. Something that knows more about the house than they do and walks its perimeter every night for reasons of her own. They note, with the careful honesty of someone who wants to be fair to the evidence, that they try to stay logical. That they are aware of the general cultural understanding of cats as spiritually attuned animals. And that nonetheless, all of this combined, the spare room, the nightly rounds, the portal jumping, and the inexplicable exits, has them very, very thoroughly convinced that Beatrix is something more than an ordinarily perceptive cat. Story 20, The Girl at the Mall. Fast, clear, and completely transformative in terms of what our storyteller believes. They were at a mall with their mother and sister. Their mother had stopped at a makeup counter and the sisters continued on toward another store. As they walked through a lounge area, the kind with scattered tables and sofas for shoppers to rest, our storyteller felt the familiar prickling sensation of being watched. They turned their head. A girl was sitting near a group of people at one of the sofas, resting her arm casually on one of the seated women. Around 10 or 11 years old, perhaps. Pale. Unnervingly still. Her hair hanging down over the sides of her face in a way that partially obscured her features. Her eyes were open and fixed on our storyteller, unblinking, and she was smiling, just slightly, with her lips closed, in a way that did not quite read as friendly. Our storyteller stopped walking. They turned to their sister and asked if she could see the girl by the couch. Their sister looked. She said, "What girl?" When our storyteller looked back, the girl was gone. Not walking away, simply gone. The woman whose shoulder she had been resting on gave no indication of having noticed anything. No one in the lounge area was reacting in any way that suggested a child had just been among them and then vanished. Our storyteller says this is the moment they became a believer. Not gradually, not over time, in that one instant, looking at the space where the girl had been and understanding that no one else had seen her. That experience belongs to them alone. And they carry it the way you carry something that showed you, very plainly and permanently, that the world is slightly larger than the one you had been inhabiting. Story 21, The Name on the Card. This one happened on Christmas Eve of 2025, recent enough that it is still fresh, still close, still being turned over in the minds of everyone who was there. Our storyteller's brother and his wife Amanda were joining the family for dinner. Amanda's mother, Diana, and Amanda's sister Isabella had also been invited, a deliberate effort to bring the two families together for the holidays. Their mother, wanting to be organized and welcoming, wrote out little place cards for each seat and arranged them carefully on the table. When she came to Isabella's seat, she wrote a name on the card and placed it without looking closely at what she had written. The name on the card was Amber. Not Isabella. Amber. When everyone sat down, Diana looked at the place card next to hers, where Isabella should have been seated, and began to cry. Diana had another daughter. A daughter named Amber, who had died when she was only 5 or 6 years old. This was not something anyone in our storyteller's family knew. Not one of them. Diana had never mentioned Amber. Our storyteller's mother had no knowledge of this child's existence. There was no possible way she could have confused the names or drawn on any subconscious memory, because she did not have one. She wrote the name of a dead child she had never heard of onto a place card and set it at the table where that child's grieving mother was about to sit. The family was left silent. And then, because what else can you do, they sat with the quiet wonder of it. Diana's daughter, gone for all those years, making herself known at Christmas dinner in the only way available to her. A name appearing where it had no business being. A small, unmistakable hello from somewhere just beyond the edge of what we can see. Story 22, The Missing 47 Minutes. And our final story for tonight. Our storyteller is careful to frame this correctly from the start. They are not panicking. They are not claiming an abduction. They are simply, honestly, completely unable to account for something that happened on an otherwise ordinary Monday. They were at Walmart, waiting for a grocery pickup order for their mother. At 4 minutes past 9 in the morning, they sent their mother a text message telling her they were there waiting. They know, with certainty, that they did not wait longer than 3 minutes before a store employee brought out the order, because they were listening to the same song when the person came out. They got in the car and drove straight to their parents' house. 10 minutes away, minimal traffic, no stops. When they arrived, their parents were worried. They asked if everything was okay. Our storyteller said of course, and mentioned the text they had sent from Walmart about 15 minutes earlier, expecting their parents to agree, yes, obviously, that explains the timing. Their father said that text had come through an hour ago. Our storyteller checked their watch. It was 4:57 in the afternoon. They checked the text. The timestamp read 4:10. They had been at Walmart at 4:10. They had left within 3 minutes. They had driven 10 minutes to their parents' house. The total should have been around 13 minutes. 47 minutes are simply gone. Unaccounted for. Not experienced, as far as they can tell. Not remembered. They say again, they are not panicked. They did not see anything strange. They feel fine. But they do not know what happened, and they are asking, honestly and plainly, what you would do. Whether you would be concerned. Whether this has happened to you. And honestly, I do not have a clean answer. I know that our sense of time can sometimes slip in ways that feel inexplicable. I know that attention and distraction can account for gaps that seem impossible. And I know that there are experiences people carry, quiet, strange, undramatic, that simply do not fit anywhere in the available explanations. Maybe that is what tonight has really been about. The moments that do not fit. The sounds that have no source. The faces that disappear. The voices that protect. The names that arrive from nowhere. The children who stare from branches too high to reach and then vanish behind tree trunks as if they were never fully there at all. These things happen to ordinary people, going about their ordinary lives, in ordinary houses and ordinary towns. They happen in daylight and in darkness, in silence and in the middle of laughter, at work and at home. And what we do with them, whether we hold them close or set them down, whether we search for explanations or simply sit with the mystery, says something about who we are, and about what we are willing to believe about the world we actually live in. Thank you, as always, for spending this time here with me. If any of tonight's stories resonated with you, if something stirred a memory, a feeling, an experience of your own, please share it in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, it means more than you might think, and it helps make sure these accounts reach the people who need to hear them. Hit the notification bell so you do not miss anything that comes next. And if you have a story of your own that you have been carrying, something you have not quite known what to do with, you are always welcome to send it in. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep the lights on if you need to. Trust your animals. Listen to that quiet voice in your chest that sometimes knows things your eyes cannot see. And remember, whatever is out there in the dark, it has always been there. The only thing that has changed is that now, for a little while at least, you are paying attention. Good night, friends. Stay safe. And I will see you in the next one.